Okay, so we've all heard of World War I, right? The Great War. But do we really get just how big of a deal it was? I mean, this thing completely redrew the map of the world. It wasn't just a war, it was the event that kicked off the modern era. So the big question is, how on earth did it all happen? Let's dig in.
Take a look at this number, 40 million. It's just staggering, isn't it? It's almost impossible to really picture that many people. But that's the estimated cost. Total casualties, military and civilian. 40 million lives changed forever, or just ended. This was something different. This was warfare on an industrial scale. And honestly, it left a scar on humanity that we can still feel today.
And that mind-boggling scale of destruction really brings us to the central mystery that's fascinated people for over a century. How could a single assassination in a relatively small European city possibly trigger a global war? To figure that out, we've got to go back in time and look at just how much of a powder keg Europe really was back then.
Right. So before 1914, Europe was anything but calm. Just imagine this continent buzzing with tension. You've got this tangled web of secret alliances, a crazy arms race that's just spiraling, and all these old rivalries simmering just below the surface. It wasn't a continent at peace. It was basically a tinderbox just looking for a spark.
So picture Europe as basically split down the middle. You had two big teams, two major alliances staring each other down. On one side, you've got the Triple Entente. That's France, Britain, and Russia. And on the other, the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. You know, people called it a balance of power, but it was anything but balanced. It was more like a massive continent-wide standoff where everyone's got their finger on the trigger.
And this didn't just happen overnight. The decades leading up to 1914 were like watching a train wreck in slow motion. You had the Franco-Prussian War in 1871, which created a unified Germany and left France desperate for payback. Then there was the naval arms race, with Britain and Germany building bigger and bigger battleships. And all the while, the Balkan region was just exploding with its own conflicts, earning it the nickname the powder keg of Europe. I mean, the stage was perfectly set for disaster.
And then it happened. On a sunny day in June of 1914, that spark finally hit the tinderbox. In Sarajevo, the heir to the entire Austro-Hungarian Empire, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was riding in an open car with his wife, Sophie. A young Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip stepped out of the crowd and shot them both. It was a shocking act of political protest, a demand for independence that would have consequences nobody could have possibly imagined. And this wasn't just seen as another political murder. As the historian Christopher Clark put it, this was like a 9/11 effect for the Austro-Hungarian Empire. For the hawks in the government in Vienna, this was the perfect excuse they'd been looking for to finally deal with their neighbor Serbia, once and for all.
What happens next is it's like a cascade of bad decisions, a series of dominoes falling one right after the other. So Austria-Hungary, with Germany's full support, sends this impossible ultimatum to Serbia. I mean, it was basically designed to be rejected. And when Serbia can't agree to all of it, boom, Austria-Hungary declares war. Then Russia, who sees itself as Serbia's big brother, starts mobilizing its huge army. Germany freaks out about having to fight Russia and France at the same time, so they just go ahead and declare war on both of them, and then they march through neutral Belgium. Well, that's the last straw for Britain. They had a treaty to protect Belgium, so they declare war on Germany. And just like that, in a little over a month, the lights went out all over Europe.
And that was it. The war that absolutely everyone thought would be over by Christmas would end up dragging on for 4 brutal, bloody years. And it would introduce the world to a scale of conflict and a type of warfare that was just horrifyingly new.
On the Western Front, this is what the war looked like. A total hellscape of mud, rats, and constant death. For years, millions of men were stuck in these disgusting trenches, fighting and dying, sometimes for months, just to gain a few feet of muddy, shell-shocked ground. It was a miserable, grinding stalemate. And a big reason for that stalemate was all the new, terrifyingly effective technology. You had machine guns that could just cut down waves of soldiers in seconds. You had massive artillery that could obliterate the landscape from miles away. And then, as if that weren't enough, you have the new horrors: poison gas, the first tanks clanking across no man's land, and airplanes fighting it out in the sky for the first time. 57,500. Let that sink in for a second. That's the number of British casualties killed or wounded on just the first day of the Battle of the Somme.
To put that into perspective, that is more than the total number of American soldiers killed in the entire Vietnam War. In a single day. The human cost was just unimaginable.
And remember, this wasn't just a European conflict. It was a true world war. Battles were fought in the deserts of the Middle East, high in the Italian Alps, and on every single ocean. Empires pulled in soldiers from their colonies all over the globe, from Africa, India, and beyond, to fight and die in a war that often had nothing to do with them.
So for 3 years, the United States stayed out of it. But in 1917, Germany made a huge mistake. They restarted their policy of unrestricted submarine warfare, basically sinking any ship they thought was helping the Allies. When their U-boats started sinking American ships, public opinion in the U.S. flipped, and suddenly the immense industrial power of America was on the side of the Allies. It was a massive turning point.
But just as one giant was getting into the fight, another one was tapping out. The war had absolutely devastated Russia, leading to revolution and the rise of the Bolsheviks. So in 1918, the new government signed a separate peace treaty with Germany. This was huge because it let Germany move hundreds of thousands of its troops from the Eastern Front over to the West for one last massive do-or-die offensive.
That final German push ultimately failed, and in November of 1918, the guns finally fell silent. But the end of the fighting wasn't the start of a lasting peace. Oh no, it was really just the beginning of a whole new and arguably even more dangerous era.
In what felt like the blink of an eye, 4 massive ancient empires were just gone. The German, the Austro-Hungarian, the Russian, and the Ottoman empires. All of them, which had shaped the world for centuries, they just collapsed. And in their place, you get a completely redrawn map of Europe and the Middle East, creating new tensions and power vacuums that, honestly, we're still dealing with today.
The treaty that officially ended the war, the Treaty of Versailles, was supposed to create a permanent peace, but for the Germans, it felt like anything but. They called it the Diktat of Versailles, the dictated peace. They were forced to take all the blame, stripped of their military and colonies, and handed a bill for reparations so massive it was crippling. It created a deep, burning sense of national humiliation.
Really, the whole post-war situation was a mess, just waiting to happen. You had Germany being crushed under the weight of this debt, which fueled incredible resentment. You had new countries being carved out of old empires without much thought to the people who actually lived there. And the brand new League of Nations, which was supposed to prevent all future wars, it was basically powerless from the start. But the deepest scars weren't on any map. They were on the people. An entire generation of young men was just gone. The lost generation, they called them, wiped out. For countries like France and Germany, the loss was so profound it's hard to even comprehend. It was a wound that would never really, truly heal. So, was it really the war to end all wars? Or was it just Act 1 of a much bigger, much more horrific global tragedy? I think looking back, the answer is pretty clear. The seeds of the Second World War were planted right there, in the mud of the trenches and in the bitter negotiations at Versailles. The world, it turned out, still had a much, much higher price to pay. Thanks for joining this explainer.